So, I'm Sarah Crompton and I'm a writer and a commentator about dance, and I've spent many happy evenings in the Coronet Theatre. So I'm really pleased to be here now to host this question and answer with Russell Maliphant and Dana Fouras as part of the Coronet Inside Out season. And just talking to you both kind of really brings back a lot of happy evenings, and it seems odd now to be in a digital space when before we've been in the theatre. So that made me think about space. And if I was talking about your work, Russell, I would say that it's really about the flow of bodies through space and through light. And I thought it would be interesting to start off by saying, how does the space that you're working in affect how you feel about the choreography?
Space is kind of set and setting to some extent, and with all pieces, particularly because we work so much with the dark, the darkness is a setting, but there's a relationship to the audience that is a kind of an important part of a response as a performer, and that reversed the audience to the performer. And the space at the Coronet is really quite particular, I think, because of the way it's shaped with what used to be the circle wall around the space. You have a kind of frame for the work, which is, I've never seen anywhere else.
It sits within.
It's quite unique.
Yeah.
And also you view down into that, so everyone has a view of the frame around the lighting on the floor, if you see that, or the the figures on the stage. So that's particular. Well, we both really kind of started performing in larger spaces. So Royal Ballet or Sadlers Wells, Royal Opera House or Sadlers Wells. And then, I mean, for me, when I started to make solo work as an independent artist, that was beginning small and doing, performances at the Arnold Feeney or in Bristol, which I don't know how many seats it is, or the ICA, which might be 100 seats, or Chisenhale, Bonnie Bird. And I always really enjoyed that close proximity where you can hear the audience breathing, you can hear if they're with you or if they're a little bit restless.
It's more immediate.
It's very immediate. It's a sensory engagement together, which you have different things going on if you're at a large auditorium and you have maybe an orchestra pit. So the performance is different. The way you perform.
The performance techniques are different, I think.
In what kind of way are they different?
Well, to make that reach across the orchestra pit into, the low stalls, and to also to manage the difference between the stalls and the amphitheatre. You may, if you're in an opera house, it's a flying house, you have an enormous height above you, usually a lot of elaborate scenery to contend with. So the perspective of the figure is a completely different visual picture to a small jewel box, that maybe you open and look into.
The energetic reach that is necessary as a performance technique at the Colosseum or the Opera House, or if you were performing somewhere like Herod's Atticus, is quite different than you would need in the Coronet. And because of that engagement, that form of engagement, and then there's certain works that sit, because it's a relatively small frame for the work. There's a particular works that sit within that frame, and some that don't sit within that frame because they're made for a different frame, really, a different.
Yeah. How, I should say that a lot of the questions that I'm going to ask have been sent in by people because people wanted to know the answer. So how did you start performing at the Coronet? That was one of the questions that came in online.
I met Anda when she had the other space, the print room, and I can't remember how we met, but someone put us in touch, and I went to see the space, and there were a lot of things that I found really interesting about the space, and at the same time I felt like I didn't have anything that was quite small enough that would sit well there. And then we kept in touch, and then I saw the Coronet space. And when Anda showed it to me, it had the stage dropped, and I thought, oh, this is a great space. I really love it, with this frame of the circular wall around it, and I could find some pieces from past works that would fit within the framework of that and within the space of that. So we tried Maliphant Works 1, and that seemed to go well, so we tried Maliphant Works 2, and then we've just completed Maliphant Works 3 before the lockdown. We just got it in there.
Yeah, which was good and very memorable. And Donna, as a performer, what's it like to perform there? I mean, how do you feel on that stage?
Ooh. I love the Coronet. I love that the entire atmosphere. It's like a theatrical fantasy. I was thinking about it last night, that it was my idea of what a theatre was probably before I even set foot in one. And it's just, that is a beautiful place. I mean, even down to the dressing rooms, everything has Anda's kind of design touch to it. You feel embraced by the entire building. I do. From the moment you walk in, you're kind of a part of it. And just the journey from being in the dressing rooms, backstage is quite complicated. Small doors, stair ladders to reach the stage. You're under a kind of platform backstage. It's a bit of a rabbit's warren, and it's just an interesting journey to the stage. So it was like that kind of culmination of all my theatrical fantasies. I love it.
Yeah. As Russell touched on earlier, you both started in completely different settings. And I think it's quite a good moment just to fill in the background of your careers, that you both started in as ballet dancers, didn't you? In huge spaces. So do you want just, Donna, to tell people how you came into dance in the first place?
Well, I grew up in Australia. I lived on the coast in Queensland, so it was very much a beach culture there. I think it was quite an inviting place for people to come and retire to, which meant that actually a lot of artists who'd been working in Sydney and Melbourne came up to retire there and often found themselves bored and began coaching or teaching. So I was really fortunate to land into the lap of some incredible dancers. My first important teacher was a woman called Kathleen Gorham, who I think she'd been a founding member of Ballet Rambert, and then Borovansky, which was the company in Australia before the Australian Ballet formed. So Robert Helpman, all these people from Australia were there, and she just had such an incredible imaginative approach. Was
what
to explain her. So then I worked with her for about 3 or 4 years, and then I had some other teachers, joined on Ransley, very big teachers in Australia, had a large school. My mother was a pianist, and she would often accompany us for class. So there was a very musical element to the work that I was doing, because she was also sharing a lot of, music. I studied classical violin also, which was a really big part of my education. And then I ended up coming overseas to do the Adeline Genet competition, which is an RAD competition. I won a silver medal that year, and there was no gold awarded, but there were some teachers there from the Royal Ballet School that invited me to come and audition the next day. So I did that at 8 o'clock the next morning. I was at the Talgarth Road studios, which was, again, incredibly a kind of romantic attachment and connection for me. I had all these coffee table books of Anthony Crickmay and Lynn Seymour working with Kenneth McMillan, and I was suddenly in those studios. I spent 2 years in the school, and then I graduated into the company at Covent Garden.
And Russell, there's this weird thing, you've got symmetrical careers, but you're sort of a few years ahead. So you also joined the Royal Ballet School at 16. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, what had you been doing before that, before you come into the Royal Ballet School?
I'd been going to I've been going to somewhere called the Patricia Newman School of Dance in Cheltenham, and I did tap, modern, ballet, and at 14 I had decided I was going to be serious about ballet, and I did something called an opinion audition at the Royal Ballet, where you could go and do a class at the school, and they would say,
your legs are too short,
there's no hope for you, or you're in with a chance,
feet don't point.
They saw me and said, work hard over these next 2 years and come back and audition for us when you're 16, which I did. I got in, and then joined the company, and then went to Sadlers Wells Royal Ballet, which was at the time the touring company.
And how long did you stay there?
So I stayed there for 7 years, the same amount of time as Dana.
We never met when we were there.
Right.
I think she joined when I left.
But even so, I mean, I think the Covent Garden Company and the Sadlers Wells Company didn't really mix, and during my time there so much anyway. There was the Sadlers Wells were always on a world tour, or a national tour somewhere. So
yeah, it was endless touring. It was really a lot of touring at the time, and 8 shows a week, and
So why did you leave? First of all, why did you leave? Why did you move on? Both of you, really.
The character of Sadlers Wells was changing at that time. It had always been a kind of company that did quite a lot of touring, an endless amount of touring, and triple bills, 8 shows a week, and in that triple bill, and quite a lot of new work. So you were often learning new pieces, and in those triple bills, if you didn't really like the rep of one of the pieces, it's kind of okay, you've got another 2, and then probably another triple bill later in the week, or the following week, or something like that. So you were always moving on. And at that point, somewhere around, after I'd been there about 5 years, it changed to we started doing Peter Wright's Swan Lake and Peter Wright's Sleeping Beauty, and they were very good productions, and we did them a lot. We did 100 shows of Swan Lake and 100 shows of Sleeping Beauty, and I think in that it's very different. There's a repetition, and it all becomes about what role are you doing in that piece, and how often are you doing that role, and if you're working towards. I was a choreographer soloist as that time progressed, and as you. If you're always doing the corps de ballet roles, and then you're trying to work on doing the Prince in Sleeping Beauty or Swan Lake or something like that, or Prodigal Son, or it's quite a difficult time. You've got to kind of jump that, and then when you become a principal, it might be easier because you're not doing easier in some ways. It's a different focus because you've got
your performance schedule is completely different, because if you're a corps de ballet member, but you're given an opportunity the next night, you're back in the line with the swans or townspeople and this kind of thing. So you're constant, but a lot of the principals maybe get 1 or 2 shows.
And there's a different difficulty in that. But I think around that time, I thought I'm not actually enjoying this in the way that I had for the first 5 years. There's something about this process of doing this night after night after night, and I was enjoying classes. But then the rehearsals of this again, because someone else is new, is coming into this role, but I think somewhere around that time, I started to hear myself kind of moaning. And when you get to be a moaner in a company, it's like it's all wrong. It's not where you should be. And I kind of realized it's not where I should be, but I didn't really know where I should go or what I should do. And I started to look around. At other companies, and then there were also some great people who wanted to leave also, who were in a similar kind of feeling, and in the end we all decided to leave together. They formed a company, Dance Advance, Susan Crowe, Jennifer Jackson, Sheila Stiles, Michael Batchelor, Stephen Sheriff, and myself, and we did the first stint with Sir Kenneth McMillan, who made Sea of Troubles on us. And we had a piece by Chu Song Go, an American choreographer. And we had a kind of group work made by the 4 choreographers in the company, of which I wasn't one at the time. I was just dancing. And so it went on.
And Macmillan was important to you both, because Donna, your kind of dancing career, I mean, he chose you very early on to dance with him. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yes, and when I was in my final year at school, it was a big birthday celebration for Dame Ninette de Valois. So Kenneth was commissioned, I suppose, to create a piece on the students. So I created Soirée Musicale with him I was 16, 17. It was a fantastic time. We worked every Saturday. Usually the school was like, you'd have 1 class on a Saturday and then you'd be finished. And we would kind of stay and work all day on Saturday, creating solos and pas de deux and coda, and it was just a little celebratory piece, I suppose. And Ian Sperling costumed it, who had done the costumes for Elite Syncopation, so it was super fun to be involved in that. And I think that really changed my whole idea of being a dancer. I had, like I said before, I had all these books that showed the process between choreographer and dancer. And that's what really attracted me, I think. That just seemed so interesting, and so creative. I then moved into the company, and he cast me to dance Juliet quite young. There was a bit of tussling about that. He wanted it to happen. I'm not sure my director wanted that to happen. And it was a strange dual, feeling that it was a good thing and maybe I wasn't wanted there. So I just took it and went with it. I did a lot of Kenneth's pieces there, and really loved having the input. He was always coming in to rehearse at that period, and he went on to make Prince of the Pagodas and Winter Dreams. So I was often in the studio during those processes, and it was really great time. I think that, as like Russell says, when you do a lot of repetition, and I think a childhood dream of that kind of swan and fairy and all those kind of make-believe world of the classics changed for me. So then it became more important that I was just working with a choreographer. And I was quite lucky at the time, and in the company a lot of people came. Forsyth came and sat in the middle because Sylvie had just arrived, and it was just always more interesting to me to be in the room with the choreographer, not a repetiteur just teaching you the steps and not really having a connection to the history of that piece. I found there was a lot missing, but it was way more direct communication when the choreographer was there. So I think that I was feeling to move away from the company after Kenneth died, sadly, because it just wasn't the same place for me without him there. So I decided to move on, and on that day I ran into Russell, literally, the day I left.
Right. And a new partnership was formed. Russell, when had you, how important do you think it is that ballet?
Sorry, you just froze.
Oh, sorry. In terms of your choreography, how important is that ballet background? How much does that feed into what you do as a choreographer?
I think that it depends who I'm working with. I guess I looked at ballet and studied it and ingrained it for 20 odd years, maybe longer, but certainly 20 years solid, easy, going deep into it. And I think even a lot of my work after that, if it's still in relationship to that. If I'm going away from it, it's because it's there that I'm moving this way. It's not, you don't just forget about it. And there are lots of...
Although when we met, you were very far from it at that stage. I think you'd worked with DV8, you'd worked with Laurie Booth, you worked with Michael Clark, and you were going through that kind of unlearning phase of,
that's kind of what I mean by
the physicality of ballet. The up, the pull up instead of the grounding. You were studying capoeira, you were starting to kind of, go in.
Excuse me.
So that was a totally different Russell at that point, which was really interesting to see. I mean, it was totally inspiring to me to know that he'd come from the similar place to where I'd come from, and yet he could move like that just through studying other dance forms. That was like super exciting. So, and then I think after, well, probably when we made Sheer,
mm-hmm.
we you started to pull more line, more classical things from that. And then he went into the work with Sylvie, which obviously, you know, she had her great technique to, you know, to utilize. So for him, that was, you know, he understood that because he'd come from that.
I think there's the learning that is part of my practice, and some of that involved an unlearning of things that I was experiencing in my body within a different context. Say, if you put a ballet dancer into deviate physical theatre, it's a different...
They did.
Which they did. It holds a different currency than it does within, you know, within the Royal Ballet or within, you know, a ballet company. So the value given to that and the context around that I realized suddenly, oh, there's so much else that I want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that involves unlearning what I have already spent a lot of time, and I'm not sure how to stop some of those holding patterns that I've trained for years to have. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how to undo those, and that's a work in itself.
How did you undo them? So at what point do you decide that you want to choreograph and therefore you want to alter the way you move?
I think I realized I wanted to alter the way I move when I started to work with Deviate.
Right.
And
I didn't know that.
You know, some of that, you know, the project that we worked on for Dead Dreams of Monochrome Men, I think it was a 10-week making process, and I think we did 10 performances of it. So it was, you know, relatively short period of time, you know, to pick up a technique or a practice. I mean, to even really begin to engage with it deeply, it's got to be 3 years, 4 years, you know, something. So I felt like I was really on the tip of something there. And, you know, I started doing yoga a lot in 88. And that I kept practicing. I still practice some now. And I think working with Laurie Booth, that was again a different context, because we could utilize in improvisation, you could utilize many of the ideas of classical language, a glissade, a jeté, an arabesque, but not fully form them. You might use the dynamic of a glissade or a grand rond de jambe or a chassé or you know, these different, or turns, you know, these kinds of things. You could use them and actually not necessarily finish the full "here I am" in arabesque, you know, because then it's clear, it's obvious, but if you do the first part and move on to, you abstract it a little bit, take it a little bit away from its form, but it's still informed by the form. So I think I had a different value of ballet within the improvisational context, and that's kind of continued to be part of the mix, I would say, that I work with now, that I do improvisation, and, you know, some of that might be to do with more an improvisational way of movement. I mean, the way we learn steps in classical ballet, you're often learning A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You know, you've got your first position, second position, or your chassé, prepare, pirouette,
combinations of those. Yeah.
So you move those around, but if you're learning something like capoeira, the way that you practice, you learn a roundhouse kick and you've got a kind of a leg movement, and then you improvise with it. So all the time you're working with a flow into and a flow out of and a between. So you're kind of working with transitions, which is a very different model of processing information and putting information together than the classical ballet route. And they both lead to incredible movement if practitioners are very, very good.
So isn't it right to say from that you became a choreographer because you were interested in moving differently, so that in a sense your choreographic practice springs out of your dance practice? I mean, that's how it sounds from that. Is that right, would you say?
Yes, I would say that the things I was learning physically and finding, and that were, I was passionate about, they were interesting, they gave me energy to explore those things. That was the fuel to choreograph. And, actually the first time that I choreographed, I made if we say that improvisation is different to choreography and yet very related because it's kind of instantaneous composition, you're having to make the composition in the moment. So you want to know about what's come before, what's come after, and you want to be making a decision based on those elements and dynamics and really what's happening with the light, what's happening with the music. So I made an improvisation, a structured improvisation for myself. And then that was seen by Ricochet Dance Company, who asked me if I would choreograph something for them. And I had never choreographed anything up to that point. I had made a structured improvisation for myself. So I was facing unemployment at that time. As a freelance artist, I had nothing that I was moving on to. So I thought, well, I could do that, and maybe I could teach them improvisation and use the skills that they have and play with those, and which is what we did over a process. And actually the piece it had its moments, but it was, kind of good days, bad days, improvisations can come and go. And I knew that I could do better, and they knew that we had done better on certain days than others. So they asked me again, and we did a second piece. And then I choreographed, I set things. So we started to have a different process and putting things together. And that kind of got me really interested in how to structure things, how to work with dynamics, how to work with light, ultimately, as I started to work with Michael. And so it went that way, really.
And so one of the questions that came in was what inspires your choreography? What now would you be inspired by?
I think the dancers that I'm working with is a very big inspiration, and how they move, what they embody, the techniques, the idiosyncrasies, the styles, the range, and that's set within a context of the lighting and how light affects what they're doing, how they affect the light, and sound worlds.
And another question was, what's it like choreographing for Dana? So you've done, down the years, an immense amount with Dana. She's always been there as an assistant, as part of the process, even if she wasn't appearing on stage. Yeah. But what's it like when you actually make a piece together?
Well, we've had big breaks in making together. I think from 2002, I think about then we did Sheer.
Yeah, 2001.
2001. And then in the next piece that we made together, was
2015.
2015. So, you know, there was, and then we've made
2 before Sheer as well.
Yes. But the big break in there. And, you know, things shift, but because Dana knows very much part of my process, I think that there's a kind of ease between us that doesn't really necessarily need to be explained verbally so much. There's a kind of kinetic understanding, or
yeah. And you, I mean,
I think we a lot of it. So it's there's a lot of things that are completely agreeable. You know, usually any route to take is agreed. I don't think we've ever had a tug of war over something that kind of, you know, clear. It doesn't mean it's always easy. I mean, we definitely have, you know, ups and downs in the studio, and times that Russell's way is a lot to do with forming a piece. He'll really work in very broad brushstrokes. So he wants to put parts together that maybe you're improvising for a long time in a specific light, that as you're in it, you're not really understanding what the visual is that he's seeing. And sometimes those things that maybe don't match up. So it's a tempo kind of...
There might not be steps, so to speak. There's a certain way of moving that is still improvised with, and it's like I'm seeing it thinking, okay, I know that when there are steps and dynamics and pauses, and then that will be good for this amount of time. So let's go on to get the structure to see where that needs to change, and that'll inform the music, and that'll inform the light. And we need to make this transition to that. So there's no point in going over all the little details of this part, which maybe Dana, as the dancer, wants to go over the details.
Right.
And I'm thinking, oh, you know, just hold on for that. We'll get there, but not at the moment.
Usually the week before the performance goes on, we might get there. So that's a frustrating thing for me as a dancer, you know, that I want to know what I'm working with so I can deepen it and make it stronger, and understand it fully. And yet Russell wants to be very vague about that. So I think there can be a kind of tussle in that because our tempos are different. You know, I want to kind of have a little more regulated information, and he'll want to rush on.
The making, though, is very, if we make material and we're making a duet contact or arms, or, you know, whatever relationship, we're really fast with that. And
it can flow like that. Those things. If we have the right sound and the right atmosphere in the room, we've got some great improvs that have only been a kind of a touchstone for things that we've created. But I think they could actually be things on their own, which is nice to have. But you know, they're from years ago, and we have many films because we video everything. We're our own rehearsal directors, so you know, not having a coach in the studio with you is something to figure out. You know, you don't have, you as a dancer, you've always got that person there, that teacher, the mentor, the choreographer, you know, telling you. But then when we're both inside a piece, the video has to be that for us.
Yeah. I'm going to pause. I can hear a weird rattle. Can you hear a weird rattle, or is it just something I'm getting?
I can't hear any.
Okay.
No.
Okay. If no one else got weird.
My kids laughing outside. Actually, they're in the garden.
They must have just heard us.
There must be something rattling. Okay. I'm going to. So I'm going to just do a sort of quick fire round now on your careers, because people have asked very specific questions about your careers. So I'm going to, just kind of quick questions, which are not really very well linked. So have you, either of you, ever had serious injuries, and have they ever happened while you're on stage dancing?
You go.
I have had kind of I've had a couple of serious injuries. I'd say two. One was my arm. I constricted the thoracic nerve bell. I lost the use of my arm for, it just wouldn't move. There was no message getting through to move the shoulder. And that was like that for about 9 months to a year. So, I was literally, I put my arms up at the side, that would happen. There was nothing, just no brain message getting through to the shoulder.
And that was young.
That was my third year at the Royal Ballet School. So
when something happens to you like that, in that kind of moment, it's pretty significant, I think, because you see everyone else like taking their places, and moving into the career that you've been working towards. I think that had a really big effect on you.
At that time, my practice, my technique and everything was going very well. I started to learn colas in La Fille Malgarde as the school performance, as a one-handed bum lift.
Yes.
In that something went out, and it hurt, and I put my arm in a sling and went to see the doctor. And eventually, 3 days later, when my arm couldn't move, I found out what that was. But they gave me my third year at the Royal Ballet School again, and I started, as this was beginning to get better. I got taken into the company. And then the other injury, I would say, I did tore something in my knee. Well, I tore the anterior cruciate ligament in my knee doing a double cabriole. And that was about 2 days before I was supposed to perform my first solo, improvised solo, as an independent artist. And that took a long time, that took a long time to get, for me to get dancing again. And I danced without an anterior cruciate ligament for 24 years. But I had it reinstated in 2015, I think. I've never had an injury.
In a performance.
I've never injured. Well, no, I have.
Have.
I have actually. Yeah.
On your 50th birthday,
Yes.
actually, you were performing at Onagata in Tokyo, and
Yeah.
I went for his birthday, and I saw him do a really small jump, and something happened at the end of it, and I thought, I just knew something had gone wrong, and then he got through the performance in a great deal of pain, I'm sure. I think it fully dislocated, and maybe you did the meniscus as well. But that was not nice to see.
I had a performance the next night, and I did it, but gingerly. I would say.
We did quite a lot of years of when we were performing the solos 1 and 2 on tour, and so we were always, each of us in the wings while the other one was dancing. And there were many times during one performance of one where I would see his knee fully dislocate, and he would do some kind of really imaginative roll, push it back in, get up and carry on. So he has an extremely high pain threshold and honouring the audience to continue is something that's quite special, I think. I had a fall down some steel stairs when I was at the Royal Ballet School, and I fractured a lumbar vertebrae and shattered my coccyx. That was interesting. I think the repercussions of that through my spine has continued. I don't think I had it taken care of properly, I just rested and then carried on. I didn't really want to talk about it. I didn't really want to share that I'd had this, you know, issue. And it was, yeah, I've had some back problems. I tore my psoas, which ruptured a hip capsule, which was incredibly painful, not on stage, but it did stop me performing. And that was a very long period where I was bedridden, and I think Russell thought I wouldn't walk again, let alone dance. So, you know, slowly we worked together really, and there's just been so much of Russell's methods that are about deep listening, and you know, we don't have any trainers or support, physio, this kind of thing. We maybe see an osteopath when things feel like we can't take care of it, but I think we would always try to work through things in the methods that you know, Russell's explored for just decades now. It's really interesting to be able to work on yourself to get yourself back, rather than just, you know, lie on a bed and have someone else diagnose and take care of you. And I think that's really just been a necessity through being independent dancers, you know, not having that financial aid and benefits and, you know, pay if you're off work, that you can take your time for things like that. We've really had to work through a lot of things, and to great benefit. You know, it's been a really interesting journey.
What about mentors? Who have been important mentors to you both?
I had a mentor called Peter Bonaham, who worked in Ottawa at Le Groupe de la Place Royale. And he used to have a company that only worked in research and development. And they would invite choreographers to come and develop something that they wanted to explore. And then they might have a showing. And Assis Carrera, who's Canadian, brought him over to the Dance Exchange. And I was lucky enough to do a process with him. And he was very good at mentoring, because he didn't want you to do anything other than go deeper into what you were trying to say. And you know, that idea to dig deeper if it's not hitting the spot, and you know, to have someone who could give feedback of what he was getting as an audience member, and whether that was, you know, working or so he was very good. And then I went over to Canada to do another process, a second process over there, and some of the process, a man called Ted Senman Robinson, who's also a choreographer, but worked very closely with Peter Bonaham. He mentored me also, and you know, again, a very interesting process, and in the same manner that they would just try to guide you really to, you know, what is it that you want to do here? Why?
It's not making steps for the sake of steps.
Mm-hmm.
Donna, what about you? Who has inspired and mentored you?
You know, there's so many different people for different stages of my time. I mean, for sure, Kenneth McMillan is right up there. Just the way that he was always interested in you as a person. I think if he was working with you, I've heard other dancers say that. I really felt that. it was a lot to do with the imaginative approach to technique. So not just this kind of, you know, gymnastic, dry kind of perfecting things. It was much more of opening my mind up to flow and to going beyond where you feel are your limitations. That was really interesting. I also had a period of time where the company was the Royal Ballet was about to go on tour to Japan, and I had a difficult time that this is going really badly.
You talk about when you
I was overweight
by the standards
of the Royal Ballet, so I was not allowed on the Japanese tour.
Right.
And a really great teacher at the Royal Ballet at the time, who taught class every day, was a dancer called Elizabeth Anderton. She was just a great friend and a really fantastically energized teacher. I really adored her, and she knew about this, and she put me in touch with Lynn Seymour. While the company were away on a 8-week tour, a 6-week tour, then it was a summer holiday. So I actually had 3 months working really intensively with Lynn Seymour one-to-one. And I mean, yeah, I learned a huge amount of things from her regarding life, regarding stagecraft, movement, and all things that had been handed to her through Rudolf Nureyev, Robert Helpman, you know, and I love that kind of way with dance. You know, it's got to be person to person. The links are made with your human connections, and what a privilege. I mean,
I would have to say someone also that probably has influenced both of us in a way is Dreas Reinecker.
I was going to say him next.
Yeah.
He's a Pilates teacher.
Yeah.
And we both worked with him also at very different times of our careers. And he had a huge amount of knowledge of the body, was able to form exercises just for you, what you needed in your body. Brilliant.
And also very aware of different techniques, having done ballet before he did Pilates. And then he worked with Rambert at the time that they were moving from a classical company to a contemporary company, and they had some fantastic teachers.
Yeah.
So that history of movement that he was party to through all of those years, and has kind of approached many people individually what they need for their technique and their alignment and their capacity.
And if he usually comes to our performances still today, and his opinion is one that I rely on quite heavily.
That's good, yeah.
Likewise.
I feel all our conversations about the kind of outside world and the richness of influence that, you know, I think is one of the amazing things about dance. It's not only kind of physical form, but everything you're talking about is that kind of rich history that comes into everything that dancers do, which is, you know, to me, and I expect to you, one reason that this time of, you know, in lockdown, in quarantine, is such a strange time of separation from everything like that. And so turning inwards now into the inside part of the conversation, how have you sort of kept creative in lockdown when, I mean, at least you've got each other, but you're shut off from so much else? How have you managed to do it? Russell first.
Well, I'd say I've been doing quite a lot of online work because, you know, often there's not the time to do that. And I love exploring new things. And there are some teachers that I had come across and wanted to go more deeply into some of the techniques that they were teaching. So I've been doing quite a lot of that, and that's been really fun. Creatively looking for ways that we can work around the home. So we've done a lot of work in the garden, and as there's no money coming in and a lot of money going out, you know, we're really frugal, and kind of getting to that idea of repurposing and permaculture and trying to get the stasis right, so that things can look after themselves and sustain. So we're doing that in the garden, and finding ways that I can do something for free, like, you know, if I've got to paint the windows on the 3 levels above ground, how can I do that without having to spend £1,000 on the scaffolding?
Or killing yourself.
yeah, both would be good. And at the moment, I've got some climbing rope. I've got a harness. If you never see me again, it's because it's all gone.
Sorry, Dana. What about you?
Well, I mean, I was a stay-at-home mum for 10 years, so it's kind of known to me how to be at home a lot, and we are really fortunate to have a garden, and we were really fortunate that last year we started really seriously taking care of the garden. So we're growing a lot of vegetables, and I'm absolutely loving it. I cook a lot, so I like to cook with food from the garden. I mean, we also have 3 teenagers, so there's a lot of music in the house, and we want to stay positive for them, really.
We're both working with National Youth Dance Company, which we're not sure what is going to happen with that at the moment, because it was supposed to premiere in April. But I'm choreographing and Dana's doing the music for that piece. So I've been teaching a little bit the cast, and on Zoom, and we have been kind of going through some of the musical choices, and you know, how we might work with that if that eventuates. But it's very difficult to say in the current.
So we got to the halfway point in the process, and I think it was really coming together. We were working with Ryan Stafford, lighting designer, and Russell was working closely with all of us. The dancers are a fantastic group. They were really inspiring to us, and it was almost there. So it would be great if at some point we can manage to complete that piece, because I think it would be a real shame. It was going to be a good work.
Do you have any, you know, from your experience and from everything that you know, do you have any sort of advice for young dancers, young dance makers who find themselves inactive in lockdown, about how they should proceed and how you find the sort of self-discipline, if you like, to carry on?
I was talking to some of the National Youth Dance Company dancers about this, and you know, I think, you know, sometimes the energy is waning for, you know, you're usually going towards something, you're working towards something, and, you know, the performances have gone, this is gone, you're not meeting up with people to, so you're just on your own. And I really think go where the energy is and keep learning, because, you know, a lifetime it's not long to learn something. When you think about some of the techniques and information that is out there, I mean, just in terms of knowing about your body, knowing about the anatomy, and knowing about many, many different styles that inform that, you know, you could work for multiple lifetimes and still be learning. So if you can find something that piques your interest, follow it, because that's you can't do slog on, oh, I'm not really interested, but I feel like I should know it. So that's never going to wash. But if you can find the aspect of it that is piquing your interest, whether it's learning popping or shuffle or rolfing, martial arts, ballet, you know, any of those
or just interesting levels of performance. You know, I think I take a lot of inspiration from singers or actors or just totally different art forms that still involve performance, but have a different take. But I think most of my kind of great periods of learning were also in times where I was injured or didn't have any work or was with children or coming into the studio and just being quiet in my body and listening, taking things in from other things, books, film. You take it in a different way to when your body is up there and being physical. There's only so much information, I think, that you can take when you're working physically, because so much of your concentration goes into your physicality and the memory for steps and things like this. So when there's finer tuning details, sometimes they might go over your head, you know, and I think that being quiet and watching things on YouTube, I mean, there's just endless great iconic performances that are on there if you go a bit below the surface, you know. So control your algorithms.
And you have been putting up the Russell Maliphant Dance Company performances. They've been up online on your YouTube channel. I mean, so when you watch those digitally, how do you see them differently than you see them in the theatre? How do you think you watch digital dance differently?
It depends on many things. I often, because I'm working three-dimensionally, we're working with live energies, and sometimes there's a mirroring response in your neurons, or there's a kinesthetic response to a movement in the studio. I haven't worked so much with film where I watch it for the film's sake. I'm watching it because I'm looking at what the dancers are doing and how to go to the next stage, or choreographically what we might shift.
Yeah, you're just using it as a tool.
Yes. So, you know, beginning to put things out on the digital archive, it's really more about sharing process and what that process entails. And you'll see aspects of the performance, and depending on, you know, was it a 3-camera shoot, or was it me just doing it from the back of the auditorium on a camcorder and whispering into the back of it, or yeah, you know, what was it for? But if there's a logic to sharing it, or there's something that I think is, you know, very beautiful happening on the stage, you know, very few of the things have been created for that film. So I often feel the things that are missing in the experience. But if it's the commercial work, then the commercial work is made for the film. It's made for that output. So it's, I don't feel that lack in those things. I sometimes miss that live element, but if a great performance is captured, it's great to see. And I had a really nice experience watching on Facebook when you're watching with others, and so you know the thread of information from different people is going through. That was a fun sharing kind of.
And the company's 25 years next year, isn't it? I mean, do you have plans for the future? How do you feel when you face the future? I mean, Ben Okri made a film for this Coronet series where he talked about needing to find a new way perhaps into the future that is better than the past. I mean, have you started to think about those kind of things?
Where we go in the future?
Yeah. And how you celebrate, and how you're going to celebrate your 25 years?
Well, I mean, we talked about many different ways of celebrating, and you know, in some ways, doing another work seemed, well, that's what we do anyway. So that's not that doesn't make it different than 24 years or 26 years or 27 years, you know. So we thought, we have amassed many different interesting photographs over the years. Dana's taken many of me in the studio with lots of different, Robert Lepage or Sylvie or all the dancers from the company, and many different people. And some of those are fantastic. And we've been lucky enough to do some shoots with some brilliant photographers over the years. So we have many of productions through time. And we did think that it might be nice to have a gallery kind of showing where you can have a walk through the processes of captured on photograph. And maybe there would be some digital video that we would gather together as we're looking to put the archive together. You know, I'm having to look through a lot of stuff anyway. So that could be a way, but we'll, you know, at the moment we'll have to see.
Yeah, he's got time. And will there be, this is a popular question, will there be a Maliphant Works 4?
Probably not for me. In a performance aspect. Maliphant Works 3 was my final performance on stage, and so I don't know. That's up to Ander and Russell, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I will dance again like you, but we'll see. And you know, I'm happy to I love making work, so, and I love performing there, so, or seeing performances there, so we'll see.
Yeah, so that would be something for everyone to look forward to, I think. I mean, it would be really nice. So thank you ever so much for talking to me. I hope that people have enjoyed the conversation. I certainly have. It's been really, really interesting and covered a lot of ground. So thank you, Russell. Thank you, Dana.
Thanks,
Great to see
Sarah,
you. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Watching, yes.